Thomas Miller knew the sound of death when he heard it, a desperate guttural howl that cut through the Montana wilderness like a knife. At 12 years old, growing up as the son of the area's only wildlife veterinarian, he had heard plenty of animals in distress, but this was different. This sound carried weight, power and unmistakable agony. The late autumn wind whipped through the dense forest behind his father's clinic, carrying with it the scent of approaching snow and something else, the metallic tang of fresh blood. Every instinct, every lesson his father had drilled into him about wildlife safety screamed at him to turn back, to get help, to do anything except follow that sound. But something in that howl resonated deeper than fear, touching a place in his soul that demanded response. The fading daylight cast long shadows through the pine trees, and despite his mother's strict rules about being home before sunset, Thomas knew he couldn't ignore this call. Moving with the careful precision his father had taught him, Thomas tracked the sound deeper into the forest. Each step brought him closer to a scene that would change his life forever. The howls had turned to labored breathing, punctuated by the occasional metallic clang that made his heart sink. He knew that sound. Illegal trappers had been plaguing their area for months, setting cruel steel jaws that caught anything unfortunate enough to stumble across them. As he crested a small ridge, he saw it, and for a moment, all the air left his lungs. There, not 30 feet away, was a full-grown grey wolf, its massive form caught in the merciless grip of a steel trap. The animal's thick winter coat, a magnificent blend of greys and whites, was stained crimson around its trapped leg, but it was the wolf's eyes that froze Thomas in place, piercing yellow orbs that locked onto him with an intelligence that seemed to peer straight into his soul. In that moment, he wasn't looking at a dangerous predator. He was witnessing raw nobility brought low by human cruelty. Dr. James Miller had taught his son everything he knew about treating injured wildlife, but this was different. This wasn't a deer or even a mountain lion. This was Canis lupus, the grey wolf, an apex predator capable of taking down an elk. The wolf's chest heaved with each breath, its massive teeth occasionally bared in a grimace of pain. But something in its behavior struck Thomas as extraordinary. Despite its agony, despite the natural fear and aggression such an animal should show toward a human, the wolf remained eerily still. Watching him, Thomas knew the statistics. A desperate wolf could snap a man's arm like a twig, and here he was, a 12-year-old boy contemplating helping one. His father's voice echoed in his head, warning of the dangers. But another memory surfaced, his father's constant reminder that all life deserved respect and care, especially when humans were responsible for its suffering. With trembling hands but a steady heart, Thomas began to formulate a plan, using his jacket as a barrier between himself and the snow-dusted ground. Thomas slowly settled into a position where he could study the trap's mechanism. The wolf followed his every movement, its eyes never leaving his face. Years of helping at the clinic had taught him the basics of trap release, but theory and practice were worlds apart when dealing with a full-grown wolf. The animal's leg was badly mangled, and Thomas knew that even if he managed to free it, the wolf would need immediate medical attention to survive. The severity of what he was attempting began to sink in. This wasn't just about opening a trap anymore. This was about trying to save a creature that, by all natural laws, should see him as prey. Yet something in the wolf's demeanor, a certain stillness that seemed almost deliberate, made him press forward. Every movement had to be perfect. One mistake could cost him his life. As Thomas positioned himself to release the trap, time seemed to slow down. The forest around them had gone quiet, as if nature itself was holding its breath. The wolf's ears twitched at every sound, but its eyes remained fixed on Thomas, watching with an intensity that seemed to transcend the natural order of predator and prey. With a deep breath, Thomas pressed down on the release mechanism, hearing the metallic snap that signaled success. The wolf didn't move immediately, seeming almost shocked by its sudden freedom. Then, in a moment that would haunt Thomas's dreams forever, the massive predator slowly rose to its feet, standing at full height, its shoulder level with Thomas's chest. The wolf took a single step toward him. Time froze as boy and beast faced each other, connected by something deeper than words could express. Then, with a slight tilt of its head that seemed almost like a gesture of acknowledgement, the wolf limped a few steps before turning to look back at Thomas. In that moment, Thomas knew with absolute certainty that his life would never be the same. The Miller family dinner table had never felt so tense. Thomas sat pushing his food around his plate, his mind replaying the afternoon's events while his father discussed a difficult case from the clinic. The weight of his secret pressed down on him like a physical force. Dr. Miller was explaining the latest reports of wolf activity in the area, his voice carrying the concern of someone who understood the delicate balance between wilderness and civilization. Sarah, Thomas's mother, watched her son with the intuitive worry that only a parent can master. Noting how he flinched at every mention of wolves, the kitchen's warm light couldn't dispel the shadow that seemed to hang over Thomas, especially when his father mentioned the increasing number of illegal traps being found in the forest. The boy's hand shook slightly as he lifted his glass and a few drops of water splashed onto the tablecloth. This small accident became the catalyst that broke his resolve. "Dad," Thomas's voice cracked as he spoke, drawing both parents' immediate attention. The words tumbled out in a rush. The howl, the trap, the wolf's eyes, and the moment of connection that defied everything he'd been taught about wild predators. Dr. Miller's face paled as his son described the size of the wolf and the severity of its injuries. Sarah reached across the table to grasp her son's trembling hand, her own face a mixture of horror at what could have happened and pride in her child's courage. As Thomas described the wolf's behavior, its uncanny stillness, the intelligent gaze, the deliberate acknowledgement before it limped away, Dr. Miller leaned back in his chair, his professional expertise warring with paternal concern. The revelation hung in the air like smoke, changing the very atmosphere of their familiar kitchen. Their quiet life on the edge of wilderness had suddenly become considerably more complicated. Dr. Miller didn't speak immediately after Thomas finished his story. Instead, he walked to his office and returned with a large medical kit and his tranquilizer rifle. "Show me," he said simply, his voice carrying both authority and urgency despite Sarah's protests about the growing darkness. Both father and son headed into the forest. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of blood and gold as they followed Thomas's earlier tracks. Dr. Miller moved with the cautious expertise of someone who had spent decades working with dangerous wildlife, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The trail of blood from the injured wolf was still visible, dark patches stark against the frost-covered ground. What they found at the trap site made Dr. Miller pause. The blood patterns and paw prints told a story that his experienced eyes could read clearly. This was no ordinary wolf. Its behavior, as Thomas had described, suggested something extraordinary. Their discovery sparked a complex series of decisions that would reshape all their lives. Dr. Miller recognized the signs of a potentially mortal injury. Without treatment, the wolf would likely develop a life-threatening infection, yet helping a wild wolf wasn't like treating a domestic animal or even other wildlife. Federal regulations, public safety concerns, and the very nature of the animal itself created a web of complications as they discussed options in hushed voices. Movement in the underbrush caught their attention. There, in the gathering darkness, stood the wolf it had returned, whether by chance or choice, and was watching them with those same intelligent eyes Thomas had described. The magnificent predator stood its ground, its injured leg held carefully off the ground, its gaze moving between father and son. Dr. Miller's breath caught in his throat. In 20 years of veterinary work, he had never seen a wild wolf behave this way. The animal's presence seemed deliberate, almost like a request. What followed was a moment of silent communication that would fundamentally change the Miller family's path. The wolf took a halting step toward them, then stopped, its eyes never leaving Dr. Miller's face in that moment. The veteran veterinarian understood. This wasn't just about treating an injured animal. This was about something far more profound. The wolf's behavior defied natural instincts and common wisdom about wild predators. As they cautiously made their way back to the clinic, followed at a distance by the limping wolf, Dr. Miller began formulating a plan that would either prove to be his greatest achievement in wildlife medicine or his most dangerous mistake. The decision to help this wolf would test not only his professional skills, but also challenge everything he thought he knew about the relationship between humans and wild animals. As darkness settled over the Montana landscape, none of them could have predicted how this single choice would ripple out to affect not just their lives, but the entire community's understanding of wilderness and its inhabitants. Dawn broke over the clinic, with an air of tense anticipation. Dr. Miller had spent the night preparing a secure treatment area in the barn behind the main building, converting a horse stall into a makeshift wolf enclosure. The wolf had remained in the shadows of the forest throughout the night, appearing and disappearing like a ghost, but always returning. Its presence was a constant reminder of the unprecedented nature of their situation. Sarah had called the local wildlife authorities and secured emergency permits. Her background as a teacher helping her navigate the bureaucratic maze, Thomas watched from the clinic windows as his father made final preparations, the morning light revealing fresh snow that had fallen overnight. The wolf's tracks in the new powder showed it had circled the clinic multiple times, keeping its distance but never straying far. The behavior was so unusual that Dr. Miller had started documenting everything, knowing they were witnessing something extraordinary. The actual treatment would be the ultimate test of their theories about this unusual wolf doctor. Miller had prepared a cocktail of tranquilizers specifically designed for large predators. But getting close enough to administer them safely would be the challenge. The wolf's injury had worsened overnight, its movements becoming more labored, and infection was a growing concern. As the family gathered to implement their plan, the wolf emerged from the tree line, moving with deliberate purpose toward the barn. Its size was even more impressive in daylight, standing nearly 3 feet at the shoulder, with a thick winter coat that would have been magnificent if not for the blood and mud matting its injured side. What happened next left even Dr. Miller, with all his years of experience, speechless. The wolf, instead of fleeing from their approach, lay down in the snow, positioned so they could clearly see its injured leg. It was a display of trust so profound it challenged everything they thought they knew about wild predators. The following hour tested every bit of Dr. Miller's professional skill and nerve. Working with a wild wolf, even an apparently cooperative one, required extreme caution. The tranquilizer took effect smoothly, allowing them to move the massive predator into the prepared treatment area. Up close, the wolf's true magnificence became apparent. Despite its injury, every line of its body spoke of power and natural dignity. The wound, when finally examined properly, revealed the full cruelty of the trap that had caused it. Dr. Miller worked methodically, cleaning and treating the severe tissue damage, while Sarah assisted and Thomas documented everything with photographs and notes. The wolf's size and muscle structure identified it as a mature male, probably one of the dominant wolves from the local pack. Yet its behavior defied everything known about alpha wolves, raising questions that would soon attract attention from wildlife experts across the country. As the anesthesia began to wear off, everyone moved to safe positions to observe the wolf's reaction to treatment. What they witnessed in those first moments of consciousness would become the subject of numerous scientific papers and endless debate in wildlife conservation circles. The wolf awoke calmly, showing none of the panic or aggression typical of wild predators emerging from sedation. Instead, it carefully tested its treated leg, then turned its attention to each person present, its gaze lingering longest on Thomas. Dr. Miller observed that its pupils were fully focused, suggesting it was completely aware of its surroundings and choices. The wolf's behavior seemed to challenge the traditional understanding of wild animal consciousness, suggesting levels of reasoning and trust that most experts would have dismissed as impossible. The morning light streaming through the barn windows illuminated a scene that would mark the beginning of an extraordinary journey for everyone involved. What happened next would challenge their existing protocols and set the stage for an unprecedented experiment in human-wildlife interaction. The wolf, while maintaining a cautious distance, showed no signs of wanting to leave the treatment area. Instead, it settled into a corner where it could observe both the barn door and its human caregivers, its posture suggesting not resignation, but a deliberate choice to stay. Dr. Miller, drawing on decades of experience with wild animals, recognized that they were entering uncharted territory. This was no longer just about treating an injured wolf. They were witnessing something that could revolutionize our understanding of wild animal intelligence and decision-making. As they secured the barn for the night, leaving food and water for their unusual patient, Thomas noticed how the wolf tracked their movements with those intelligent eyes, seeming to memorize their routines. None of them realized yet that this was just the beginning of a series of events that would challenge not only their understanding of wolves, but also their perception of the boundaries between wild and domestic worlds. News of a wild wolf being treated at the Miller Veterinary Clinic spread through their small Montana town like wildfire. By morning, Dr. Miller found himself dealing with concerned calls from local ranchers, wildlife authorities, and increasingly, the media. The wolf's presence posed complex legal and safety challenges that no local veterinary facility had faced before. Federal wildlife officials arrived to inspect their setup, their initial skepticism giving way to cautious interest as they observed the wolf's unusual behavior. The animal, despite being fully conscious and recovered from sedation, maintained its extraordinary composure. Even more remarkable was how it seemed to deliberately demonstrate its non-aggressive intentions, carefully positioning itself to appear non-threatening while still maintaining the natural dignity of an apex predator. The officials, many with decades of wolf management experience, admitted they had never seen anything like it. The wolf's behavior challenged everything they thought they knew about these wild predators. Inside the makeshift wolf enclosure, Dr. Miller conducted his morning check with a new protocol that respected both safety requirements and the wolf's apparent intelligence. The predator's recovery was remarkable, not just the physical healing, which exceeded expectations, but its entire demeanor toward human presence. When Thomas accompanied his father during these checks, the wolf's attention would focus on the boy, with an intensity that was neither aggressive nor submissive, but oddly communicative. The animal's yellow eyes tracked their movements with clear consciousness, its responses suggesting not just instinct, but genuine comprehension. Dr. Miller documented every interaction, recognizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented in wildlife medicine. The wolf's wound was healing well, but it showed no sign of the typical wild animal's desperate desire to escape human contact. Instead, it seemed to be choosing to stay, creating an entirely new category of wildlife interaction that would soon attract attention from research institutions across the country. The situation became more complex when Elena Martinez, a leading wolf behavior expert, arrived from the University of Montana. Her initial skepticism disappeared as she observed the wolf's behavior patterns. The animal displayed what she termed conscious cooperation, actively participating in its treatment process while maintaining its wild nature. It wasn't domestication or submission she was seeing, it was something entirely different. The wolf remained unmistakably wild, its power and predatory nature evident in every movement. Yet it had chosen to engage with humans on its own terms. Elena's presence added scientific rigor to their observations, her expertise helping to document behaviors that defied conventional understanding of wolf psychology. The most striking was how the wolf would make eye contact, something wild wolves typically avoided, but do so in a way that maintained its status as an equal, not a subordinate creature seeking human dominance. As word spread through scientific circles, the Miller Clinic became the center of an unprecedented debate about wild animal consciousness and decision-making. The wolf's behavior suggested levels of reasoning that challenged traditional views of wildlife psychology. It maintained clear boundaries. No one could touch it without its explicit cooperation. Yet it willingly participated in medical treatments when needed. More surprisingly, it began showing signs of what Elena called reciprocal communication, actively trying to convey information to its human caregivers. The wolf would signal through body language when it was ready for wound inspection, when it needed space, or when it sensed something in the surrounding environment that required attention. This wasn't just an injured animal tolerating human help. It was actively engaging in a complex exchange that suggested sophisticated cognitive processes. The implications of these observations would soon extend far beyond their small Montana town. The turning point came during a routine morning check, when the wolf demonstrated behavior that even Elena struggled to explain within existing frameworks of wild animal behavior. As Dr. Miller approached to examine its healing leg, the wolf not only cooperated, but actively adjusted its position to facilitate the examination. Then, in a moment that would be replayed countless times in wildlife behavior seminars, it used its muzzle to draw attention to another small injury they hadn't noticed, a behavior that suggested not just intelligence, but the ability to recognize human medical intervention as beneficial. The wolf maintained its wild dignity throughout these interactions, never becoming domesticated or pet-like, but rather establishing what Elena would later describe as a cooperative relationship between equals. This distinction would prove crucial in the weeks to come, as the implications of their discoveries began to attract both scientific interest and public controversy. The Miller family found themselves at the center of a paradigm shift in how humans understood their relationship with wild predators, though none of them could have predicted the events that would soon test this newfound understanding to its limits. The peaceful routine that had developed around the wolf's treatment was shattered one cold morning when Marcus Reeves, the largest rancher in the county, stormed into the clinic demanding action. Winter had come early to Montana, driving wolf packs closer to ranch lands, and Reeves had lost several valuable cattle in recent weeks. The presence of a wild wolf under human care inflamed an already tense situation, Dr. Miller found himself trying to mediate between increasingly hostile factions. Ranchers concerned about their livestock, wildlife advocates celebrating their work, and local authorities caught in the middle. The wolf, seemingly aware of the rising tensions, remained extraordinarily calm during these confrontations, its behavior becoming even more deliberate and controlled. This self-awareness only added to the uniqueness of their situation, as it became clear that the wolf was actively participating in diffusing potential conflicts through its own behavior. Elena documented how it would position itself to appear less threatening during visits from skeptical officials or concerned community members. While never compromising its fundamental nature as a wild predator, the controversy escalated when evidence suggested that local wolf packs were behaving differently in the areas surrounding the clinic. Ranchers reported wolves avoiding traditional hunting grounds, while wildlife observers noted more frequent but less aggressive wolf sightings. Elena's research team discovered that the territorial boundaries of local packs had shifted, creating what she termed a neutral zone around the clinic. The implications were staggering. Somehow, the presence of one extraordinary wolf was influencing the behavior of entire packs. The wolf under their care, which they had carefully avoided naming to maintain professional distance, seemed aware of its role in this changing dynamic. Its interactions with humans remained measured and intentional, but it began showing increased attention to sounds from the surrounding forest, particularly at night, through careful observation. They realized it was responding to distant wolf calls, though never answering them directly. This suggested a level of conscious choice that challenged existing assumptions about wolf pack dynamics and individual wolf behavior. Local media attention soon gave way to national interest, as the implications of their discoveries spread beyond the scientific community. The wolf's continued presence and unusual behavior patterns attracted film crews and researchers from across the country. Each new observation added to a growing body of evidence suggesting that wild animals, particularly apex predators like wolves, possessed greater cognitive capabilities than previously recognized. The wolf's responses to various situations demonstrated not just intelligence, but what appeared to be ethical judgment. It showed aggression only when truly threatened, cooperated with medical treatment while maintaining clear boundaries, and actively worked to minimize conflict with humans. These behaviors couldn't be explained by traditional wildlife biology models. They were observing something new, something that suggested a capacity for reasoning and decision-making that would rewrite textbooks on wild animal behavior. However, this scientific excitement was tempered by growing tensions within the community, as not everyone welcomed these revelations. The situation reached a critical point when threats against the clinic began to surface. Anonymous calls warned of consequences if the wolf wasn't dealt with, while others suggested more direct action against the clinic itself. Dr. Miller installed security cameras and reinforced the wolf's enclosure. But the greater concern was the effect of this tension on the wolf itself. Yet even as the atmosphere grew more hostile, the wolf's behavior remained remarkably consistent, alert but not aggressive, watchful but not fearful. Elena noted how it would position itself to monitor potential threats while deliberately maintaining a non-threatening posture, a display of intelligence that seemed almost diplomatic in nature. The wolf's ability to navigate these complex social dynamics without resorting to either aggression or submission challenged fundamental assumptions about wildlife behavior. It demonstrated an understanding of human social conflicts that went beyond instinct or conditioning, suggesting a level of social intelligence previously unrecognized in wild predators. The growing conflict had an unexpected effect on Thomas, who found himself becoming increasingly protective of their extraordinary patient. His father observed how the boy's initial fear of the massive predator had been replaced by a deep respect and understanding. The wolf, in turn, displayed a particular attention to Thomas's presence, often adjusting its behavior to appear less intimidating when the boy was nearby, while never becoming too familiar or pet-like. This careful balance of interaction fascinated Elena and her research team, as it demonstrated the wolf's ability to maintain its wild nature while establishing complex social bonds. However, this period of observation and discovery was about to be interrupted by events that would test not only their understanding of wolf behavior, but also their ability to protect a creature that had chosen to trust them. The threats against the clinic were escalating, and the wolf's extraordinary intelligence would soon be demonstrated in ways that would challenge even the most skeptical observers. Sheriff Dan Cooper's arrival at the clinic on a bitter winter morning marked a turning point in their increasingly complex situation. His weathered face carried the gravity of news he'd rather not deliver. Inside Dr. Miller's office, the sheriff laid out a disturbing pattern. Multiple reports of armed individuals spotted near the clinic's perimeter, suspicious vehicles photographed by trail cameras, and conversations overheard at local bars, suggesting organized action against the wolf. The predator, from its enclosure, had already demonstrated awareness of these mounting threats. Its behavior had shifted subtly but significantly, spending more time alert, positioning itself to monitor multiple approaches to the clinic and responding to sounds that human ears couldn't detect. Dr. Miller recognized that the wolf's heightened vigilance wasn't just instinct. It was displaying a tactical awareness that suggested it understood the human conflict swirling around its presence. The sheriff's presence seemed to confirm what the wolf had been trying to communicate through its changed behavior. Elena's research team had documented an even more intriguing development. The local wolf pack's behavior had altered dramatically. Trail cameras captured footage of wolves patrolling the clinic's perimeter at night. Keeping their distance but maintaining a protective circle around the facility, the captive wolf's response to these patrols demonstrated what Elena termed cross-pack communication, subtle signals and body language that suggested ongoing information exchange with its wild counterparts. This revelation added another layer of complexity to their situation. They weren't just protecting a single wolf. They had become the focal point of a broader wolf community response. The sheriff, examining Elena's evidence, recognized that the human threats and wolf behavior were escalating in parallel, creating a potentially explosive situation. The winter storm building on the horizon would only complicate matters further. But its approach seemed to heighten the wolf's already alert state. Something was coming, and the predator knew it. Thomas, who had developed an uncanny ability to read the wolf's behavioral cues, noticed subtle changes that others might have missed. The wolf had begun positioning itself differently in its enclosure, always maintaining sightlines to both the forest and the clinic's main building. Its attention would snap to seemingly random points in the surrounding woodland, tracking something that remained hidden from human observers. Dr. Miller had learned to trust these signals. The wolf had repeatedly demonstrated an ability to detect threats long before they became apparent to human security measures. The animal's behavior suggested not just awareness, but strategic thinking, as if it were calculating potential scenarios and responses. This level of cognitive processing challenged everything they thought they knew about wolf intelligence, but it also raised a crucial question. What exactly was the wolf preparing for? The answer would come sooner than any of them expected, and in a form none of them could have anticipated. The situation's complexity increased when Marcus Reeves made an unexpected return to the clinic. This time without hostility, his face carried the strain of someone struggling with divided loyalties as he revealed what he'd discovered. The threats against the clinic weren't coming from local ranchers, as everyone had assumed. A professional group of wolf hunters had arrived in the area, using local tensions as cover for their real agenda. The wolf's unique behavior had attracted the wrong kind of attention, making it a valuable target for those who dealt in rare animal specimens. As Reeves shared what he'd learned, the wolf's attention remained fixed on him, its yellow eyes reflecting an understanding that seemed to transcend the natural order. The predator's calm but alert presence during this revelation demonstrated once again its extraordinary ability to process complex human dynamics. Dr. Miller observed how the wolf had positioned itself to watch both Reeves and the forest, its body language suggesting it was integrating this new information into its ongoing assessment of the situation. That evening, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, the wolf's behavior shifted dramatically. Its usual calculated movements became more urgent, its attention constantly drawn to specific points around the clinic's perimeter. Elena's team, monitoring through night vision cameras, reported unprecedented activity among the local wolf packs. They had moved closer to the clinic than ever before, establishing what appeared to be a coordinated watch pattern. The captive wolf's response to this development was remarkable. Instead of showing agitation, it displayed what Elena could only describe as tactical patience, conserving energy while maintaining absolute awareness of its surroundings. Inside the clinic, Dr. Miller and Sheriff Cooper reviewed security footage and developed contingency plans, but both men understood they were dealing with forces beyond their normal experience. The wolf, now standing at full height in its enclosure, head raised toward the darkening sky, seemed to be waiting for something specific. The approaching storm would test not just their security measures, but their entire understanding of wolf intelligence and the complex relationships between humans. Domestic spaces and truly wild creatures, the night ahead would change everything, though none of them, except perhaps the wolf itself, knew exactly how. The storm arrived with a savagery typical of Montana winters, turning the landscape into a howling white void. Within hours, the clinic was effectively cut off from the outside world. The heavy snow making roads impassable and communication unreliable. Dr. Miller had prepared for weather isolation, but the wolf's increasingly intense behavior suggested their challenges would go beyond mere survival. The predator's movements had become precise and purposeful, its attention focused on specific approaches to the clinic that remained invisible to human observers through the swirling snow. Sheriff Cooper, who had chosen to remain on site, recognized the tactical disadvantage the storm created. The same conditions that isolated them also provided perfect cover for those who might wish to take advantage of their vulnerability. The wolf's behavior confirmed these concerns, its reactions suggesting it was tracking multiple threats through the storm, using senses far superior to human capabilities. The question was no longer if something would happen, but when and how prepared they could be for whatever was coming. The first sign that their situation had changed came through the wolf's sudden shift in posture. From vigilant observation to combat readiness, its transformation was striking. The comfortable familiarity of recent weeks instantly replaced by the coiled power of a wild predator. Preparing for conflict, Eleanor's documentation of this moment would later become crucial evidence in understanding wolf cognition, as the animal demonstrated not just threat response but strategic positioning. It moved to place itself between the perceived threat and the clinic's most vulnerable points, particularly where Thomas and Sarah were located. This wasn't just instinctive behavior. It showed clear tactical thinking and priority assessment. Through the storm's fury, distant wolf howls could be heard, creating what Elena's instruments recorded as a complex pattern of communication. Their resident wolf, while maintaining its defensive position, was clearly part of this exchange, though it never vocalized directly. The integration of wild and captive wolf behavior created a security perimeter more sophisticated than any human system could have devised. The attack, when it came, proved the wolf's instincts correct. Multiple figures emerged from the storm's white curtain, their approach coordinated and professional. These weren't angry locals, but trained operators executing a planned operation. Sheriff Cooper's warning shout was almost lost in the storm's howl, but the wolf had already responded to the threat. Its behavior in the following moments would challenge fundamental assumptions about wolf intelligence and decision-making capabilities. Instead of displaying the fight-or-flight response expected of a wild animal, the wolf demonstrated tactical awareness that suggested conscious strategy. It used its presence to direct attention to specific approaches, working in concert with both the human defenders and the unseen wolf pack beyond the clinic's perimeter. The storm's intensity seemed to increase, but through the whiteout conditions, other shapes could be seen moving. The local wolf pack had closed ranks around the clinic, creating a protective barrier that merged natural and human defenses into a single coordinated response. The complexity of what unfolded in the storm's heart would be debated in wildlife behavior journals for years to come. The wolf's actions demonstrated not just intelligence, but strategic thinking that synchronized with both human defensive efforts and wild wolf pack tactics. When the attackers attempted to breach the clinic's security, they found themselves confronted by a defense that combined human technology with wild predator instincts in ways they couldn't have anticipated. The wolf's ability to process and respond to rapidly changing threats while maintaining non-lethal deterrence challenged every existing paradigm of wild animal behavior. As the conflict reached its peak, the storm's fury provided a natural theater for an unprecedented demonstration of wolf-human cooperation. Through the howling wind and swirling snow, the wolf's presence remained a constant, its extraordinary intelligence directing a defense that would rewrite scientific understanding of wild predator capabilities. The night was far from over, and the most remarkable demonstrations of the wolf's abilities were yet to come, but already the events unfolding around the clinic were transforming our understanding of the relationship between humans and wild predators. The storm transformed into an almost supernatural force, its howling winds creating whiteout conditions that made it impossible to distinguish friend from foe beyond a few feet. Inside the clinic, Dr. Miller and Sheriff Cooper had positioned themselves strategically, while Elena's team continued documenting the extraordinary events unfolding. The wolf's behavior had evolved into something that transcended both wild and tactical responses. It was orchestrating a defense that combined human strategy with raw, natural instinct. Through the cameras, they could see shadowy figures attempting to navigate through the storm, but the wolf's reactions suggested it was tracking far more than their limited technology could detect. The predator's movements were precise and deliberate, each shift in position communicating vital information to both its human allies and the unseen wolf pack that had formed a protective perimeter around the clinic. The temperature had dropped to dangerous levels, but the intensity of the situation generated its own kind of heat. The first direct confrontation came when three figures breached the outer perimeter, their professional movements betraying military-style training. The wolf's response demonstrated a level of tactical understanding that would later become the subject of extensive scientific study. Instead of attacking, it used its presence to herd the intruders into positions where Sheriff Cooper and his deputies could intercept them. The wolf's intelligence showed not just in its strategy, but in its restraint. It understood the difference between neutralizing a threat and causing harm. The storm's ferocity added another layer of complexity to the situation, with visibility reducing to near zero at times, but the wolf seemed to navigate these conditions effortlessly, using the weather as an additional tactical element. Through the chaos, Thomas watched from a secured room as the massive predator moved with fluid grace, its power held in check by an intelligence that seemed to grasp the full complexity of the situation. The wolf's actions weren't just about defense, they were about protecting both territory and pack, a pack that now, remarkably, included humans. Elena's research team captured footage of what they would later term cooperative defense behavior, the local wolf pack working in coordination with both the captured wolf and human defenders to create an impenetrable security perimeter. The storm itself seemed to respond to this unprecedented alliance, its winds carrying the howls of distant wolves in patterns that suggested complex communication. The captive wolf's responses to these signals demonstrated what Elena would later describe as multi-species tactical awareness, the ability to process and respond to both human and wolf communications while maintaining its own strategic initiative. The attackers, despite their preparation and equipment, found themselves caught between human law enforcement, natural predators, and weather conditions that seemed to favor the defenders. The wolf's intelligence showed not just in its individual actions, but in its ability to coordinate multiple elements into a cohesive defense strategy. Its behavior challenged every existing paradigm of wild animal cognition, suggesting levels of strategic thinking previously considered impossible in non-human species. Dr. Miller watched in amazement as the wolf systematically directed attention to different points of vulnerability around the clinic, its body language conveying specific information about threat types and locations. The predator had transformed their defensive capabilities, turning what should have been a vulnerable, isolated clinic into an integrated defensive position that merged human and natural elements. Sheriff Cooper, with decades of law enforcement experience, admitted he had never seen anything like it. The wolf wasn't just reacting to threats, it was anticipating them, using its superior senses and intelligence to stay several steps ahead of the attackers. Through the storm's fury, they could hear the coordinated movements of the local wolf pack, their presence creating additional layers of security that no human system could have replicated. The wolf's ability to maintain this complex defensive network, while remaining non-lethal in its responses, demonstrated a level of cognitive sophistication that would revolutionize understanding of predator intelligence. The night's defining moment came when the attackers, realizing their tactical disadvantage, attempted a more aggressive approach. The wolf's response demonstrated why it had become the subject of such intense scientific interest. Instead of meeting force with force, it orchestrated a response that used the storm, the terrain, and the coordinated movements of both human and wolf defenders to completely neutralize the threat. Its actions showed not just intelligence, but a profound understanding of proportional response and tactical restraint. The wolf moved like a shadow through the swirling snow, its presence alone enough to deter the most determined attackers, while its strategic positioning ensured maximum defensive coverage with minimum risk to any participants. As the confrontation reached its peak, the storm seemed to intensify, creating conditions that favored the defenders' integrated response. The wolf's extraordinary ability to coordinate multiple defensive elements while maintaining situational awareness demonstrated why these predators had survived and thrived for millennia. Yet even this impressive display was just a prelude to what would come next, as the night's events built toward a climax that would challenge fundamental assumptions about the boundaries between wild and domestic, human and animal intelligence. The storm's intensity reached new levels as midnight approached, creating an otherworldly environment where visibility dropped to almost zero. Through this white chaos, the wolf's movements became increasingly purposeful, its behavior suggesting it was responding to threats beyond human perception. Elena's monitoring equipment detected unusual patterns in the local wolf pack's activities. They had tightened their protective circle around the clinic. Moving with a coordination that suggested sophisticated pack intelligence, the captive wolf's responses to these movements demonstrated what Elena would later term cross-species strategic integration, the ability to combine human defensive capabilities with natural wolfpack tactics into a unified response. Dr. Miller observed how the wolf's attention shifted between multiple focal points, its body language conveying specific information about approaching threats to both human defenders and its wild counterparts. The predator's intelligence manifested not just in its tactical awareness, but in its ability to process and respond to complex, rapidly evolving situations. Thomas, from his secured position, noticed something in the wolf's behavior that others had missed. Subtle changes in its posture and movement that suggested it was anticipating rather than reacting to threats. The massive predator had positioned itself at a crucial junction between human defenders and the unseen wolf pack perimeter, creating what military strategists would later describe as a perfect command and control position. Through the storm's howling fury, the wolf maintained constant awareness of both human and wolf pack movements, adjusting its own position to optimize their integrated defense. Sheriff Cooper, watching through security cameras, admitted that in 30 years of law enforcement, he had never seen such sophisticated tactical coordination. The wolf wasn't just participating in the defense, it was actively directing it, using its superior senses and intelligence to create a security system that merged the best elements of both human and wild capabilities. The storm's intensity seemed to enhance rather than hinder these efforts, as if nature itself had aligned with this unprecedented alliance. The situation escalated when the attackers, realizing their conventional approaches had failed, attempted to use the storm's cover for a more aggressive thrust toward the clinic. The wolf's response demonstrated why it had become the subject of intense scientific interest. Instead of reacting with aggression, it implemented what Elena would later describe as multi-layered defensive orchestration, coordinating human defenders, wild wolf pack movements, and its own actions into a seamless protective strategy. The predator's intelligence showed not just in its tactical decisions, but in its ability to maintain non-lethal deterrence while maximizing defensive effectiveness. Through the swirling snow, they could see shadows moving with military precision, but the wolf's coordinated response turned their tactical advantages into vulnerabilities. The storm itself seemed to respond to this primal alliance, its winds carrying the howls of the defensive pack in patterns that created psychological barriers as effective as physical ones. The confrontation reached a crucial phase when multiple breaches were attempted simultaneously, testing the limits of their integrated defense. The wolf's response to this challenge would later be studied in military academies as an example of perfect tactical adaptation. Moving like a ghost through the blizzard, the predator coordinated a defense that combined modern security measures with primal pack strategies, creating an impenetrable barrier around the clinic. Its actions demonstrated not just extraordinary intelligence, but a sophisticated understanding of threat assessment and resource allocation. Dr. Miller watched in amazement as the wolf directed different aspects of their defense through subtle changes in position and body language, its communication equally effective with both human allies and wild pack members. The storm's intensity peaked during these moments, creating conditions that seemed to magnify the wolf's natural advantages while nullifying the attacker's technical superiority. Through the chaos of wind and snow, the wolf maintained perfect situational awareness, its responses suggesting levels of cognitive processing that would challenge fundamental assumptions about animal intelligence. The turning point came near dawn, when the storm briefly parted to reveal the full scope of what was unfolding around the clinic. The wolf stood at the center of an extraordinary defensive formation. Local pack members had created concentric circles of protection, while human defenders held strategic positions guided by the wolf's intelligence. Through thermal imaging cameras, Elena's team captured footage that would revolutionize understanding of wolf behavior. The captive wolf wasn't just coordinating defense, it was implementing sophisticated tactical concepts that showed understanding of both human and wolf capabilities. The attackers, finding themselves caught between professional law enforcement and organized wolf packs, faced a situation unprecedented in the history of wildlife conflict. The predator's strategy demonstrated not just survival instinct, but conscious tactical thinking that merged natural and human defensive elements into a seamless whole. The storm's periodic clearings revealed glimpses of a scene that would later be described in scientific journals as a perfect example of cross-species strategic cooperation. When the attackers made their final push, the wolf's response demonstrated why it had captured the attention of researchers worldwide. Instead of meeting force with force, it orchestrated a response that used minimal aggression to achieve maximum effect. The predator's movements through the storm created what Elena would later term psychological deterrence zones, areas where the mere suggestion of wolf presence was enough to disrupt enemy coordination. The local pack, responding to subtle signals from their captive counterpart, moved like shadows through the swirling snow, their coordinated actions suggesting levels of pack intelligence previously undocumented. Dr. Miller, observing through security cameras, noticed how the wolf had positioned itself to maintain clear lines of communication with both human defenders and pack members, its body language conveying specific tactical information to each group. The sophistication of this coordination challenged fundamental assumptions about wild animal cognitive capabilities. Sheriff Cooper's deputies, arriving with reinforcements as the storm began to ease, found themselves witnessing something that defied conventional law enforcement experience. The wolf had created a defensive system that combined modern security principles with primal pack tactics, effectively neutralizing threats without causing serious harm to any party. The predator's intelligence showed not just in its tactical decisions, but in its ability to maintain proportional response, using threatening displays and coordinated movements rather than actual attacks to control the situation. Through the diminishing storm, they could see the attacker's position becoming increasingly untenable, caught between organized law enforcement and a wolf pack operating with unprecedented tactical sophistication. The wolf's strategy demonstrated understanding of not just immediate tactical needs, but longer-term implications of each action, suggesting levels of cognitive processing that would challenge existing theories of animal intelligence. As dawn approached and the storm finally began to clear, the full impact of the night's events became apparent. The attackers, professional wildlife traffickers with international connections, found themselves thoroughly outmaneuvered by a defense that combined human law enforcement with wild predator intelligence. The wolf's role in orchestrating this defense demonstrated capabilities that went far beyond instinct or conditioning. Its actions showed understanding of complex tactical concepts, ability to coordinate multiple defensive elements, and perhaps most remarkably, the capacity to implement sophisticated strategies while maintaining its fundamental nature as a wild predator. Elena's team had captured enough data to support multiple research papers on wolf intelligence and pack behavior. But the most significant outcome wasn't scientific. It was the unprecedented demonstration of how humans and wild predators could work together when each respected the other's nature and capabilities. The wolf stood watch as law enforcement processed the scene, its presence a reminder that true intelligence transcends the boundaries we create between wild and domestic, human and animal. The aftermath of that night brought changes that would reshape understanding of wolf behavior and human-wildlife relationships. National media descended on the small Montana town, drawn by stories of a wild wolf orchestrating a sophisticated defense against professional wildlife traffickers. Elena's research team released preliminary findings that challenged conventional theories about wolf intelligence. Supported by surveillance footage that showed levels of tactical coordination previously thought impossible in non-human species, the wolf's behavior during and after the incident demonstrated what researchers termed sustained strategic awareness, the ability to process complex situations and implement sophisticated responses while maintaining its essential wild nature. More remarkably, the local wolf pack's continued coordination with both the captive wolf and human defenders suggested permanent changes in the relationship between wild predators and human communities. The clinic had become the center of a unique experiment in cross-species cooperation, one that would influence wildlife conservation policies worldwide. Dr. Miller found his veterinary practice transformed into a living laboratory for studying wolf intelligence and behavior. The wolf, fully recovered from its original injury, showed no intention of leaving, yet maintained its wild dignity and independence. Its continued presence created what Elena described as a bridge species, a wild predator choosing to interact with human society while remaining fundamentally wild. The wolf's influence extended far beyond the clinic's boundaries, affecting how local ranchers and wildlife advocates viewed the relationship between human activities and wild predators. Marcus Reeves, once the strongest voice against wolf presence in the area, became an advocate for new approaches to livestock protection that incorporated understanding of wolf intelligence and behavior. The wolf's demonstrated abilities in coordinating complex defensive strategies had shown that these predators possessed capabilities far beyond what humans had previously recognized. This recognition led to fundamental changes in how communities approached wildlife conservation and management. The scientific implications of their discoveries continued to expand as researchers analyzed data from that crucial night. The wolf's ability to coordinate multiple defensive elements while maintaining non-lethal deterrence suggested levels of cognitive processing that challenged existing paradigms of animal intelligence. More significantly, its continued role in mediating between human and wild wolf activities demonstrated sustained strategic thinking that went beyond instinct or learned behavior. Elena's team documented how the wolf maintained complex communication networks with both its wild counterparts and human allies, creating what they termed a multi-species social network that redefined understanding of predator social behavior. The clinic had become a focal point for studying how intelligent wild predators could choose to interact with human society while maintaining their essential wild nature. These findings would influence wildlife conservation strategies and human-predator conflict resolution worldwide. Thomas, who had maintained his special connection with the wolf throughout these events, found himself at the center of a new understanding of human-wildlife relationships. His ability to interpret the wolf's subtle communications had proven crucial during the crisis, and now it was helping researchers document new dimensions of wolf intelligence and behavior. The wolf's continued presence at the clinic, while maintaining its connections with the local pack, created opportunities for studying how wild predators could adapt to human proximity without losing their essential nature. More remarkably, the wolf showed signs of actively teaching these interaction patterns to both its wild counterparts and human observers, suggesting a level of conscious choice in shaping future human-wildlife relationships. As winter gave way to spring, the implications of their discoveries continued to expand, challenging fundamental assumptions about the boundaries between wild and domestic, predator and partner. The wolf's legacy would extend far beyond that one dramatic night, influencing how future generations would understand and interact with the wild predators sharing their world. Spring brought new dimensions to their understanding of the wolf's capabilities. As the Montana landscape transformed from winter white to vibrant green, the predator's behavior revealed layers of complexity that continued to challenge scientific understanding. The wolf maintained its role as intermediary between wild and human worlds, but did so with an independence that emphasized its true nature. Each morning, it would patrol the clinic's perimeter, acknowledging human staff while coordinating with wild pack members that maintained a respectful distance. Elena's team documented what they termed selective integration, the wolf's ability to engage with human society while preserving its fundamental wild identity. The predator's intelligence showed not just in its tactical awareness, but in its careful balancing of two worlds, never fully domesticated yet choosing to maintain connections with human allies. Dr. Miller observed how the wolf would adjust its behavior based on specific situations, demonstrating an understanding of context that went beyond instinct or conditioning. The wolf's influence on local wildlife patterns produced data that would reshape conservation strategies worldwide. Trail cameras captured unprecedented scenes of wild wolves interacting with human settlements in new ways, showing learned behaviors that reduced conflict while maintaining natural behaviors. More remarkably, the clinic's resident wolf seemed to be actively teaching these interaction patterns to both wild pack members and younger wolves. This transmission of knowledge suggested levels of cognitive sophistication that challenged existing theories of animal intelligence. The wolf demonstrated what Elena called conscious cultural transmission, the deliberate sharing of successful adaptation strategies between wild and human-adjacent wolf populations. These observations provided crucial insights into how intelligent predators could adapt to human expansion, while maintaining their essential wild nature. The implications extended far beyond wolf conservation, suggesting new approaches to human-wildlife coexistence. Thomas's continued documentation of the wolf's behavior revealed patterns that would become central to understanding predator intelligence. The wolf showed remarkable ability to assess and respond to complex situations, often anticipating potential conflicts before they developed. Its decisions demonstrated not just tactical thinking, but strategic foresight, particularly in maintaining balance between its wild nature and human interactions. Dr. Miller noticed how the predator would deliberately create teaching moments for both human observers and wild pack members, showing what researchers would later term cross-species educational behavior. The wolf's methods challenged fundamental assumptions about animal consciousness, suggesting levels of intentional planning and decision-making previously considered impossible in non-human species. These observations would influence approaches to wildlife conservation and predator management for generations to come. The most striking demonstration of the wolf's intelligence came through its handling of new situations that arose around the clinic. When injured wildlife was brought in for treatment, the wolf would assess each case and adjust its behavior accordingly, showing what Elena termed situational empathy. While maintaining appropriate boundaries, its presence had a calming effect on other animals, yet it never crossed the line into domesticated behavior. The predator maintained its wild dignity while choosing to assist in ways that respected both human medical efforts and natural processes. The wolf's ability to make these complex judgments, combining understanding of human intentions with natural instincts, demonstrated cognitive capabilities that would revolutionize understanding of predator intelligence. Its continued presence at the clinic represented not captivity but conscious choice, a decision to bridge worlds while remaining true to its wild nature. The arrival of early summer brought subtle changes to the wolf's behavior that only those closest to it first noticed. While maintaining its protective role at the clinic, the predator began spending more time observing the distant mountains, its attention drawn to something beyond human perception. Elena's team detected increased communication between the clinic's resident wolf and wild packs in the area, suggesting what they termed strategic preparation. The wolf's behavior remained focused and deliberate, but carried new purpose that hinted at approaching change. Dr. Miller, who had learned to read the predator's subtle signals, recognized that they were witnessing another phase in the wolf's extraordinary journey. The animal's intelligence showed not just in its daily interactions, but in its apparent planning for future events, demonstrating foresight that challenged conventional understanding of wild animal behavior. These changes coincided with growing evidence of wolfpack activities shifting in the surrounding wilderness, suggesting coordinated movements that went beyond normal seasonal patterns. Thomas, whose connection with the wolf had deepened through shared experiences, was the first to recognize the significance of these behavioral changes. The predator began systematically demonstrating its methods for assessing and responding to various situations. As if ensuring its human allies could continue its work, Elena documented what she called knowledge transfer sessions, where the wolf would deliberately guide human observers through complex interaction patterns with both domestic and wild animals. This behavior suggested not just intelligence, but conscious preparation for transition. The wolf maintained its independence and wild nature throughout these demonstrations, yet showed clear intention in sharing its understanding of how to bridge human and wild worlds. Its actions revealed layers of cognitive sophistication that would influence scientific understanding of predator intelligence for years to come. The wolf was preparing them for something. Though none could yet grasp the full significance of its actions, the wolf's influence on local wildlife patterns had created what researchers termed a sustainable interface between wild and human territories. Trail cameras captured evidence of wolf packs adopting more sophisticated behaviors around human settlements. Showing learned strategies that minimized conflict while preserving natural behaviors, the clinic's resident wolf appeared to be coordinating these changes, using its unique position to demonstrate successful adaptation methods to both species. This transfer of knowledge represented what Elena described as conscious cultural evolution, the deliberate development and sharing of new behavioral patterns that benefited both human and wild communities. The wolf's role in this process showed remarkable understanding of long-term consequences and social dynamics, suggesting levels of strategic thinking previously unrecognized in wild predators. Its actions were laying groundwork for lasting changes in how wolves and humans could coexist as summer progressed. The wolf's behavior increasingly suggested preparation for significant change. While maintaining its protective duties at the clinic, the predator began systematically sharing its knowledge of both human and wolf social systems. These sessions demonstrated what researchers would later term intentional legacy building, the conscious effort to ensure its methods and understanding would continue after its departure. The wolf's intelligence showed not just in its tactical awareness, but in its strategic planning for future scenarios. Dr. Miller observed how the predator would create specific learning opportunities for both human staff and wild pack members, ensuring its bridge between worlds would remain stable. These actions revealed sophisticated understanding of both immediate needs and long-term implications, challenging fundamental assumptions about wild animal consciousness. The wolf was preparing to make a choice that would demonstrate the true depth of its intelligence and independence. A midsummer dawn brought the moment they had unconsciously been anticipating. The wolf stood at its usual observation point, its powerful form silhouetted against the rising sun, but something in its posture spoke of completion rather than routine. Dr. Miller, arriving early for his rounds, recognized the significance of what he was witnessing. The predator's behavior over the past week suddenly crystallized into clear purpose. It had been preparing them all for this moment. Elena's team, monitoring through cameras, documented what they would later describe as conscious transition behavior. The wolf was systematically checking each aspect of its established territory, not as a farewell, but as confirmation that its work was complete. The morning light caught its fur, highlighting the battle scars and well-healed leg that marked the beginning of their extraordinary journey. The wolf's presence commanded attention not through aggression, but through the quiet dignity of a wild creature that had chosen its own path. The wolf's actions throughout that morning demonstrated the full scope of its intelligence and purpose. It moved through the clinic grounds with deliberate intent, visiting each area where it had established protective protocols. At each stop, it demonstrated key behaviors one final time, ensuring that both human observers and local pack members understood its methods. Thomas, watching with growing understanding, recognized that this wasn't an ending but a transformation. The wolf had created something unprecedented, a sustainable system of coexistence between wild predators and human communities. Elena's cameras captured what she termed knowledge consolidation behavior, as the wolf orchestrated final interactions between wild pack members and clinic staff. These encounters showed sophisticated understanding of both species' needs and capabilities, suggesting levels of strategic thinking that would challenge scientific understanding of animal intelligence for generations to come. The predator's movements carried the authority of conscious choice rather than instinctive response. By midday, the wolf's behavior shifted to its final phase. Standing at the boundary between clinic grounds and wilderness, it demonstrated what researchers would later call intentional transition messaging. The predator's body language conveyed specific information to both human allies and wild pack members. Ensuring each group understood their roles in maintaining the balance it had established, Dr. Miller observed how the wolf managed this complex communication, showing remarkable ability to adjust its methods for different audiences while maintaining its essential wild nature. The local pack had moved closer than usual. Maintaining a respectful distance but clearly engaged in this crucial transition, through subtle movements and positioned responses, the wolf coordinated a final demonstration of how its established protocols would continue without its direct presence. These actions revealed sophisticated understanding of legacy planning that went far beyond instinct or learned behavior. The wolf's final hours at the clinic became a masterclass in wild animal intelligence and conscious decision-making. Rather than simply departing, it systematically reinforced the connections it had built between human and wild communities. Elena documented what she called sustainable transition behavior, the wolf's deliberate efforts to ensure its methods would survive its departure. The predator moved between groups with calculated precision, its actions suggesting understanding of not just immediate needs, but long-term implications. Thomas, who had grown from boy to young man during their time together, recognized the profound significance of what they were witnessing. The wolf wasn't abandoning its work, but graduating it to the next phase, demonstrating trust in both human and wolf communities to maintain what it had started. As afternoon shadows lengthened, the wolf's behavior indicated that the critical moment was approaching, its preparations complete. It stood at the threshold between two worlds, its presence a testament to the extraordinary journey they had shared. The final chapter of their extraordinary journey began as evening approached, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and purple. The wolf had positioned itself perfectly between the clinic and the wilderness, its powerful form embodying the bridge it had built between two worlds. Its posture spoke of neither departure nor farewell, but of evolution, the natural progression of something remarkable into its next phase. Dr. Miller, Elena's team, and the clinic staff gathered at a respectful distance, understanding the significance of what they were witnessing. The wolf's final demonstration of intelligence came not through dramatic action, but through the subtle perfection of its timing and positioning. As the sun began to set, the predator initiated what researchers would later term conscious disengagement protocol, a carefully orchestrated series of behaviors that reinforced established patterns while clearly signaling the transition to come. The local pack had moved into visible positions around the perimeter, their presence completing the circle of wild and domestic that the wolf had so carefully crafted. In these final moments, the wolf's behavior demonstrated the full sophistication of its intelligence and purpose, moving with deliberate grace. It acknowledged each human participant individually, its interactions carrying the weight of shared experience rather than domesticated familiarity. With Thomas, its connection remained uniquely powerful, yet firmly grounded in mutual respect rather than dependency. The wolf's actions showed what Elena termed conscious relationship resolution, the ability to conclude deep bonds while maintaining their significance through precise movements and positioned responses. It reinforced the protocols it had established for future human-wolf interactions. These final teachings revealed layers of strategic thinking that challenged fundamental assumptions about wild animal consciousness. The predator maintained its essential wild nature throughout, its dignity and power undiminished by its close association with humans. As twilight deepened, its behavior shifted subtly, suggesting the moment of transition had arrived. The wolf's departure, when it came, demonstrated the same extraordinary intelligence that had marked its entire stay. Rather than simply walking away, it orchestrated what researchers would later describe as strategic disengagement, a carefully planned transition that reinforced rather than severed the connections it had built. Moving with purposeful dignity, it crossed the invisible boundary between clinic grounds and wilderness, pausing to coordinate final positions with local pack members. Its actions showed sophisticated understanding of both immediate and long-term implications, ensuring that the bridges it had built would remain strong. The predator's final look back carried no hesitation or regret, but rather confirmation. Its mission was complete, its legacy secured through careful preparation and conscious choice. As darkness began to gather, the wolf's form merged with the shadows of the forest, not in retreat but in triumph. Having changed forever how humans would understand and interact with wild predators, the impact of the wolf's journey extended far beyond that moment of transition. Its demonstrated intelligence and conscious choice-making challenged fundamental assumptions about wild animal capabilities and human-wildlife relationships. The protocols it established for coexistence between predators and human communities would influence conservation strategies worldwide. Elena's research, supported by extensive documentation of the wolf's methods, revolutionized scientific understanding of animal consciousness and decision-making. Thomas, inspired by his extraordinary experience, dedicated himself to advancing the work of cross-species understanding and conservation. The clinic became a center for studying and implementing new approaches to human-wildlife interaction. Its success built on the foundation of trust and respect established by one remarkable predator. In the years that followed, locals would occasionally glimpse a magnificent wolf moving through the wilderness, teaching young pack members the sophisticated behaviors it had pioneered. Whether these sightings were of their former resident or its legacy in action became less important than the lasting changes it had initiated. The wolf had demonstrated that true intelligence transcends the boundaries between wild and domestic, showing that conscious choice and mutual respect could bridge worlds while preserving the essential dignity of all involved. Its story became not just a testament to animal intelligence, but a blueprint for how humans and wild creatures could share their world with understanding and respect.